Coming to you live from a cabin deep in the heart of the Canadian wilderness. Turn down the lights, get yourself a drink, and let's settle in for tonight's broadcast. Good evening, and welcome to Midnight Mysteries. Here are your hosts.
Welcome back to Midnight Mysteries, the heart of Canadian Paranormal Radio. My name is Nathan.
Hey everyone, my name's Alicia, and tonight on Midnight Mysteries, we're talking about demonic possession, hauntings, spirituality, and the unseen. If you're a fan of all things paranormal or just generally curious about the strange and mysterious topics we cover, feel free to follow and subscribe on all our platforms.
Tonight we have a special guest. We have Lynn Hango, and Lynn's passion is for overall wellness and helping others. Lynn graduated from the Kelowna College of Professional Counselling with a diploma of Applied Psychology and Counselling. All of her life, Lynn has been spiritually and energetically sensitive and has had experiences that might be described as supernatural. Lynn has had the privilege of working with several people who are experts in their field and have helped her hone her skills and overcome the fear that is often associated with the unknown. Lynn's desire is to bridge the gap between body, mind, and spirit, tying it all together and helping people find balance and healing in all three of these aspects of life. If you would like to learn more about Lynn and the services she offers, please visit lynnhango.com. So something we like to start off with for each one of our guests is talking about our red pill moments and our upbringing and how it relates to our worldview of the paranormal, our paranormal perspective. So Lynn, in terms of your upbringing, was there the belief in spirituality or the paranormal in your family? What did that look like if that was the case? Did your grandparents or parents ever talk about it, or did you grow up a skeptic?
Well, my parents were semi-religious, I would say. My mom was a churchgoer. She went to a Baptist church. And my dad was not a churchgoer, but he would go when asked, basically.
When told, he would go when he was told.
When told. That's right. So spirituality in general was an open thing within our household. But it was more of I think because of the Baptist background, it was a little bit more of a very Bible-based, and anything that stepped outside of the going to church, saying your prayers, anything outside of that was very questionable and probably bad. So the idea of feeling energetic presences outside of yourself or in the home or anything like that, it was like, oh my God, it's a demon.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So growing up, I was open to the idea of spirituality and other beings and all the rest of it, but there was a ton of fear involved with it, and there wasn't a lot of guidance in how to deal with that kind of stuff.
It's tough when we encounter things that are outside of our worldview, and the labels usually slapped on is, no, it's a demon. Like, pure and simple. Let's move on, right? And
yeah, we
need to have the space to explore those topics.
So I had a very similar upbringing to Lynn, where, there wasn't really a spectrum of experience when it came to spiritual stuff. It was just angels and demons, God and the devil. That's kind of the only options we had. So when we had an experience, it was very fear-based. Growing up, I had a lot of small experiences that I just kind of chalked up to bad dreams or, a fever hallucination. But looking back now, I think these were actual encounters that I was dismissing a lot of the time.
So Lynn, you had talked about growing up in a bit of a mixed background in terms of a partial Baptist upbringing, partial nominal upbringing. But for you personally, what was your red pill moment or experience? The encounter that makes you sit back and say, there has to be more than just this physical world around us?
So when I was about 17, 18 years old, I worked at a youth camp, and it was a church-based youth camp, and it was all for underprivileged and at-risk youth. And I had an experience as a counselor that week, having one of the girls in my cabin have just an absolutely intense episode of what I believe can only be a demon possession of some sort. When it originally happened, I think everybody's first thought was, oh my goodness, this girl is going into a seizure, because we were doing like the praise and worship part of the camp where they, like around the campfire or whatever. This particular night it was raining out, so we were all in the mess hall, like the kitchen dining area. They cleared it all out and they had a band going, and it was a pretty intense night. It was some pretty interesting stuff happening. And all of a sudden this girl, who, like I said, was in my cabin, she was standing right close to me, just dropped on the ground and started screaming and writhing. The camp nurse was close by, thankfully, and I caught eye contact with her right away, and she came over and she started assessing the girl and realizing that it wasn't a seizure. She got me to stand right at her head, or kneel down at her head and support her head. And it was the most eerie thing for me, because when I went down and went to support this girl's head, she stopped screaming and her eyes rolled back and stared at me for what felt like forever.
That's unnerving, very unnerving.
Yeah. And then just started like screaming and writhing again. One of the other camp leaders was close by and went and like talked to the director and stuff, and they closed down the night. They cleared out the mess hall. They did a more accurate evaluation of what was going on, and then decided to clear out my cabin so that our cabin was empty, and it was myself and what would be called my junior counselor at the time. So she was kind of co-counseling the cabin with me. And it took her, myself, the camp director, the nurse, and one of the other leaders there to get this girl back to the cabin. And she started like just screaming like one of her friends' names, and like, but it was in this otherworldly voice. Like I can't even describe it. Like I don't feel like a human could mimic what was coming out of this girl's body. Yeah, it was intense. And so they brought her back to the cabin. They just started praying over her and speaking directly to her and trying to bypass whatever this thing was. At some point, they realized that this wasn't going to be dealt with in the state that she was in. And so the camp director opened a Bible. I don't remember what verse he opened it to or whatever, but he laid it down beside her and he spoke to her and read out some Bible verses, and then just said, this is not going to be dealt with tonight. You have absolutely no authority here. You need to be quiet. And everything settled down. It was quiet for the night. And then he just assured us, he said, you know what, this is done for tonight. We'll deal with this in the morning when we're actually speaking to this girl again. I got to spend the night in a cabin, myself, this girl, and my junior counselor.
Were you just staring at her bunk the entire time? Like,
did not sleep a wink. Yeah.
Was she doing anything in her sleep?
No, nothing. She was dead quiet and still the entire night.
Wow.
And then, yeah, she woke up in the morning in kind of a daze, and like her first question was like, what is going on? Why is the cabin empty? And I didn't want to restart something because I had no clue at this point. That was my very first experience dealing with anything outside of this in your face, right?
Were you fully convinced at that point that this was a spiritual episode of some kind, or were you still thinking it could have been medical? Like, what kind of personal thoughts were you having?
I was 100% convinced it was spiritual by the time she quieted down. Like, even just with the fact of like reading scriptures and commanding her to be quiet, and she just fell still. I was like,
Right.
whoa.
Wow.
Like, I don't know. I don't know if you remember in first aid trainings and stuff like that, there's videos about different type of seizures that you might witness and stuff. And this was nothing like anything I have
First aid didn't prepare you for
heard
a
about.
That's the
Yeah.
level 2 first aid course. It doesn't cover it
Right.
in level. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're a lot braver than I would have been staying in that cabin all night. I think I would have like stood outside the cabin and stared through the window with some bear spray or something like that the entire night.
Lynn is very polite and responsible. I've known
So
her
it's
for a
a,
lot of years, so like it would not be out of character for her to be like, "Oh, you want me to stay with the demon possessed girl? Okay, I'll do that for the team."
I can do that. I got this. I also had most of the summer working with that team of people before this happened, and I had a lot of trust and faith in them too, which was very, very helpful. Like when they explained to me what was going on, and I witnessed firsthand, like the response and just her falling quiet and stuff. I felt confident that what they were telling me was true. And that's another thing that experience gave me this sense of when you speak with authority, things happen. This thing was spoken to with authority and it responded and it listened, basically. And I just kind of held that same authority all night, even though I didn't sleep. I didn't relax. I didn't go, okay, yeah, this is fine. I can sleep. I just kind of held that same authority all night.
it's so interesting that in instances like that prove that we're not just physical beings, right? That there's something spiritual about our makeup too. Because like you said, you felt like there was some weight in the assertiveness of the person who was addressing this person, and that you carried that forward. And if we were strictly just physical carnal beings, we would be puppets or the playground for whatever else there is. But that's as terrifying as it is, that's a pretty cool revelation that we're not just, bone and flesh, we're something more.
So true. And just like holding your own energy field and standing in authority in that there's not a lot that can penetrate that and move you when you know where you stand.
It took me a very long time to learn too. I had so much fear with my own experiences growing up that I had no idea that I had any kind of authority. So that's been a learning process for me as well.
And I think it's something we have to learn and relearn continually. That, sometimes we get it more, other times we don't get it as much. At least that's the way it is for me. There's seasons where I do really well with it, and other seasons where I'm like, okay, I got to shake this slumber off, or shake this lack of confidence off, and just remember there's more to it than this. So
Mm-hmm.
for Lynn, would you say this experience is what really opened the door for you, which is really what set you on this new path in terms of exploring and discovering?
I think so, yeah. I think that was the big one that just like brought all of it into reality and took it off of hearsay, like so and so said they had this experience, so and so said this or whatever, or we read about that. This is what drove it home for me and was like, okay, this is a real thing. This is in the scope of my reality now that I've had a firsthand experience and been able to survive it and thrive through it.
Did this lead to experiences for yourself? I mean, you experienced this with somebody else going through this and you were present for it, but what kind of experiences has this led to for you? Can you talk about some of the encounters you've had since then, since beginning this journey?
Yeah, since then, shortly after Colin and I got married, we were living in Edmonton, and I had an experience of sitting in the house that we were renting at the time. And he was gone visiting some friends. It was late in the evening, so it was dark out. And all of a sudden, I could feel this intense presence all around the house. it was so intense that I was like, if I look outside the window, I'm going to see something evil. That's what it felt like. It was wild. And I positioned myself in the house so that I could see all the entrances. And it overtook me to a point where I was so fearful. The amount of fear that I felt was absolutely unreal. And I felt paralyzed in that moment. And we didn't have cell phones. Oh, no, we did have cell phones, but we also had a landline. And I had my landline phone right beside me, and I phoned him. I was like, I need you to come home. I was like, I don't know what's going on, but I can't deal with whatever this is on my own. So he did. He came home and we talked about what was going on. And in that moment, he was like, you know what? You got to find a way to deal with this, find out how to curb this fear, because living in this intensity of fear is not a good thing. You're not going to be able to maintain anything living in that kind of fear, right? So I had the experience working at the camp and having kind of authority figures guide me through how to deal with it and feeling confident with that. Then I had this experience in the house and not knowing how to deal with it and not really having anybody to guide me through it. Colin, he didn't have any experiences to go off of or any way of helping guide me through it or anything. And so in that moment, it was almost like putting a damper on what I'd allow myself to experience spiritually and energetically and all the rest of it. Because it was like, well, if I don't feel anything, if I don't experience anything, then I can't experience the fear side of it. So it was just basically shutting myself down.
Just sweeping it under the rug type thing.
Yeah, totally. And then I kind of dealt with it in that moment of anytime I start feeling something rise, I just push it away and start thinking about something else, distract myself, and basically shut off that spiritual aspect of myself. And I lived like that for quite a few years until we moved to Nelson, BC. Big house. This thing, okay, it used to be a convent. So the main floor of it has a huge grand living room, beautiful with big chandelier. Has a den off to the side of it with a fireplace, another chandelier, like kind of your classic late 1800s, early 1900s feel. Like the people who owned the house before us did an amazing job at restoring it back to its original bones, along with a binder of some of the history of the house and stuff.
Really, really interesting history to that house. And I was digging, I can bring up some facts here because there's a couple people that have claimed to have had experiences with one of the nuns who was part of the convent at the time, who they say had that really, she was very protective of the home. So I'll go into some of the details here about what I pulled out of the archives. So it was this very beautiful high Victorian Gothic style home built around 1896. It was massive. It had about 8 bedrooms, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 8 bedrooms.
Oh, wow. That is quite big.
Yeah, the second story was all chopped into these little bedrooms that housed the nuns, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so there was a family that lived there initially, and then in 1904, it was sold to the Blackwood family. And that's where I think a lot of tragedy started happening within the Blackwood family. And I think a lot of the density and the energy and the things that people pick up on when they enter this home is from a lot of the experiences that they had. So the Blackwood family consisted of the husband and wife, and they had 4 daughters and 1 son. And their son, Donald, he was killed tragically in a hunting accident in 1916. And allegedly, the women in the family were so distraught they couldn't even attend his funeral. So his father was the only one who attended his funeral. And then in 1940, Mr. Blackwood had a stroke and actually passed away in the home. And that was shortly after his son-in-law's body was found in the Kootenay Lake. So this family had been through immense tragedy. And so there was a lot of grieving in the house. There was at least 1 confirmed death in the house. And then I think it was in 1958, Mrs. Blackwood moved out. I think she moved to Victoria, and she sold the home to the Sisters of St. Joseph of Peace, who converted the home into a convent, and they remained there for about 20 years. So one of the stories that I thought was really interesting, I think it was in your binder in the house, but I pulled it out of this blog that I found. But I guess at one point the house needed some work, or there was a renovation happening, and there was a construction worker there. And on his lunch break, he went to go light a cigarette, and he was approached by this woman who was clearly a nun. She was in full dress, and she politely asked him to stop smoking because smoking wasn't permitted on the property. So he said, "Oh yeah, sure, sorry." And he put out his smoke, and he went to one of his co-workers on the job site, and he said, "I didn't think the nuns were affiliated with the home anymore. You know, it's been bought and sold a couple times since then." And his friend said, "No, they're not affiliated anymore, and they haven't been for many years." And that was when he realized that this was likely a ghostly manifestation of the nun who lived there for 20 years.
One of the experiences that I had, probably the biggest, most significant one that made me go, holy crap, there's so much more to this realm, so much more to the spectrum of this realm of energetics and spirituality and all the rest of it. I was sitting in the den again. It's so funny. I'm just realizing the correlation between the house in Edmonton that
You're just sitting somewhere again.
Yeah.
And, then...
and it's late at night and my husband's out with friends.
So at this youth camp, were you sitting somewhere too?
No, at youth camp we were
I was going to say, don't let us sit anywhere near you in the future if this is the way these encounters go.
Unless you're really curious about what can go on. Yeah.
So you're sitting in the den.
Yeah, so I'm sitting in the den. It's late at night. Colin's out with buddies, so the house is empty. There was this huge room off of the side of the living room that used to be the chapel, and it had an extra, like a separate entrance. And then there was a littler bedroom beside it that had an ensuite in it, and it was another bedroom. And the ensuite door, I feel like this is significant to say, it had a little crucifix that was like, what am I trying to say? Like it was fixed to the door, like you couldn't take it off. It was installed onto the door.
It's like mounted to the door.
Yeah, mounted to the door. And there was another crucifix that was left in the house when we moved in. And when we first moved in and I saw this crucifix laying on the table with this binder, I was like, I personally don't love displaying crucifixes because to me, all I see is torture, right? I'm like, this is an awful way to kill somebody. So it's not something that I like to have displayed around. So I took that crucifix and I just put it out on the porch, which was in the kitchen at the opposite end of the house from the den and where the smaller bedroom was. Our two daughters were sharing the smaller bedroom with the ensuite at the time, so they were sleeping in there. And I was sitting in the den and Colin was gone. I heard these footsteps come from the kitchen area, through the dining room, through the living room, towards where my kids were. And it was so realistic that I thought for sure Colin was home. And I got up to go greet him. And I walk into the living room, there's nobody there. So I sat for a minute and went, okay. Went back to the den and was doing whatever I was doing. And then all of a sudden, my youngest daughter, who has always been an amazing sleeper, just started screaming. So I ran into the bedroom and she's just writhing and screaming. She's screaming, "It's tangling me, it's tangling me." And she's only 3 at this time, 2 or 3.
Wow.
Yeah. So I was like, what the heck? So I fully woke her up and I changed all of her bedding. I changed her pajamas because I was like, something's tangling her. I'm going to get rid of anything that could possibly be physically tangling her and get her settled back into bed. And then I left the room again. I hardly left the room and she starts screaming, "It's tangling me, it's tangling me" again. So I run in there and I do the same thing. I get her all changed, everything straightened out. And I'm like, okay, And then I just decided to sit with her for the rest of the evening until Colin actually came home. Not sure what was going on at this point. So then Colin came home and I told him what happened. I was like, I don't know what I was hearing. And it was probably just, like trying to slough it under the rug, make it totally nonchalant, nothing. And he at that point said, do you think it was just your imagination or you were just hearing things? And as soon as he asked me that, a flip switched and I went, I got to start like actually learning about this and figuring out like what's going on and how to really interact with these realms in a way that I can kind of go back to that original authority that I experienced in the camp and kind of own it for myself and my family.
Totally. You're trying to take ownership of your space and your family, right? Yeah. You want to protect them and watch out for them.
Yeah, exactly. So then at that point, I kind of put two and two together because I for whatever reason noticed the crucifix that was on the ensuite door in that bathroom. And I just went, holy crap, do you think whatever spirit is in this place is pissed off at me for putting that other crucifix outside? So I actually brought the other crucifix back in the house at that point, and it was quiet.
let's just put this back where we found
it. Exactly. Like, okay, we won't tamper with your space if you don't tamper with our energy. It was quiet after that. And this is when this friend of mine reconnected. She was really going on like a pretty deep dive spiritually and doing a lot of research, and she was playing around with creating some kind of course or some kind of program to help people experience their spirituality. And she actually reached out to me and she was like, I'm thinking about doing this. Would you be interested? And I was like, heck yes. Then we just like started exploring all of these realms and understand the different spectrums of energy and what could be out there and what it could mean and how you can really take control of your own space and energy field.
Now, I know on your website you have done some training in Reiki and stuff too. Was this part of what your friend went through with you?
Yeah, so I took my Reiki training. Actually, Alicia introduced me to Reiki shortly before this friend of mine contacted me, and I started working through this course with her.
With that new training, with that new understanding, how did that change your next experience? What was your next encounter like, I guess? How did you address it with this new understanding of the world around you?
Well, when I took my Reiki training, that really helped me understand how to basically fill my own being and my own space with that source or God energy or whatever you want to call it, right? And it was really interesting because that's when I really decided, okay, I want to crack open this fear element and why that comes up for me every time. And so then my next experience that I had and how it was handled differently, I was sitting in my room in the early stages of this other course that we were now doing. And I was just like, okay, what is this fear element? I'm ready to actually get curious about this. And it was like, as soon as I said that, I had this weird vision, and I couldn't say that I physically saw it, but in my mind's eye, I could see this just god awful creature sitting on my bed. And I was like, whoa. And it was like all of a sudden I put a face to the fear. And instead of freaking out about it and being like, okay, never mind, right? I played with it for a bit and I was like, what is this? Who are you and why are you here? And why do I default to this intense fear every single time something a little bit more than what feels like I can handle comes up? And it was like, as soon as I switched my mind from going, crap, that's scary, I don't want to see it, to crap, that's scary, why are you here? It just lost all of its power. I just watched this thing fade and it didn't have the same grip on me. And that's every experience I've had after that one it's been interesting to me, and I've been curious about it rather than being faced with this fear and wanting to push it away.
It's interesting just how that perspective shifted what you were encountering. Now, this was still in the Nelson house, is that correct?
That was still in the Nelson house.
And you were sitting down again when this happened?
Actually, I was standing up. I was in my room.
Yeah. Now,
I was just like getting ready for the day, basically.
Okay, so it was in the morning then. It wasn't like late at night when it was dark out.
No.
Okay.
This was a daytime, light of the day. I was feeling brave.
Yeah.
Let's deal with this.
Yeah, was it those two main encounters in the Nelson house, or did you and your family experience more? Like you had talked about your daughter going through this. Did she ever address what she went through? Did she have any other experiences? Did your husband experience anything there?
Yeah. So I've had another experience in the house, and it was really interesting because it was like as soon as that fear aspect melted away, I started feeling a really like protective energy in the house. And it was like whatever was there, I didn't feel like it needed to be removed. I felt like it was there to actually protect the house. I had one experience where I was just going about my day, and I also had this weird urge to go stand in this little room that had like the electrical control panel in it. And I was like, that's weird. And I very easily could have just pushed it out of my mind and been like, whatever. But I was like, no. It came in pretty strong. I felt like it was really important to go stand in this room. So I was like, I'm just going to humor myself and I'm going to go stand in this room. So I went and stood in this room, and all of a sudden I started hearing this like popping and fizzing, and this like smoke started coming out of the control panel in the room. I was like, holy crap. I turned off the main power supply to the house and called the fire department and got it checked out and everything. And then we had to change out the control panel and stuff. But literally it was like this feeling that dropped into me to go do something that actually stopped our house from burning down.
Wow. Yeah. It's a good thing you paid attention to it too, right? Because
totally.
That's intense. That's freaky.
Yeah. My youngest daughter, after that experience that we had, she says she doesn't remember it anymore. But at one point she came to me and said that she saw at night a lady in a black dress with long black hair. And it made me wonder if it was a visualization of like a nun. So we had our niece staying with us for a while. And there was one night that my oldest daughter woke up and she saw a black figure standing near where my niece was sleeping as well. So that was two sightings that we wonder if.
And then there was my experience as well. And this was prior to me really knowing. I don't think you had had too many encounters by that point yet, because we came to visit you shortly after you had first moved in.
Yeah.
I think this was around New Year's, Christmas and New Year's, right after you guys moved in. And so we had gone out for the evening. I think we went to the pub and we came home late and everybody was getting ready for bed. And I was staying in one of the upstairs bedrooms. And so I went up to the bedroom and I closed the door and I was going through my suitcase trying to find my toothbrush. And all of a sudden I felt just this cold air and something brushed my hair. I felt something physically touch me and it just felt like this cold brush of air. And I started to hear this audible whispering in my ear and I panicked. It was super terrifying. I had never experienced anything like that in my life. And so I jumped onto the bed and I just sat there looking around the room like a deer in the headlights. And I slept with the lights on the entire night. I was about to go crawl into bed with you because I was so scared, but
you would have been more
brave and stayed.
So there's the experiences with you guys and with some of your kids and with this construction worker. Do you know if there was any experiences with the previous owners at all, or anybody who had lived there before that related to the activity in the house?
Other than like the construction worker that's documented, I don't know. The people who own the house directly before us, we talked with them a little bit, and they're the ones who left this binder of information and history of the house and this crucifix and stuff. But they didn't say anything about any specific encounters, but I also wonder if they didn't want to scare off any new buyers.
Yeah, there's laws in the States where you have to talk about, oh, there's a legal word for it, where you have to disclose if there's been some sort of death in the home, but we don't have those same laws here, at least in Alberta.
Well, that's when we sold that house. Our realtor actually asked to put on the record directly as if we had any encounters, if we felt that the house was haunted.
Oh,
And that's
really?
something, yeah, that's something that they apparently do in Nelson because there's so much activity
Yeah.
that people want to know. They're like, has there been activity in this house? Is this house haunted? Is it, And so that's like,
Is it?
I remember telling him directly, I was like, there has been experiences, but I do believe that whatever is in this house is benevolent. Like they're here to be protective.
So you lived there for a number of years. Were those kind of your main experiences, or have you found that the more you've explored, the more you've experienced as you've gone into other places?
We actually moved down to Selmo, which is not far from Nelson, but we've got acreage and more of a lifestyle that we were looking for. I've had multiple experiences throughout being in that house and since that house, and then even experiences prior to have become more clear to me that like, oh man, like that's what this was, rather than just shoving it under the rug. Another experience that I had, I think it was right after we moved from Nelson to Selmo, or it was right before we moved. I can't remember, but we were invited to go float the Slocan River. And my dad and Colin had taken the two kids the year before, and they must have gone just at the right time of year because the water was quite calm. And they took the canoe and they went down the river in the canoe and they had fun. It was fine. Then, when we were invited to go this time, there was all of us, and I was in the canoe with my youngest daughter. My oldest daughter was in a tube. My dad and my mom were both in tubes, and Colin was just on this like blow up floaty mattress thing. We start heading down the river, and we get to this kind of shallow spot that my oldest daughter's feet started dragging on the rocks, and she was getting really upset about that. So I pulled her into the canoe with me. And there's kind of like this island spot, and Colin went down one side of it, and we started to go down the other side. And just as we started to go in, I'm in the canoe. I have the tube that my oldest daughter was in trailing behind me. She is now in the canoe. My parents had tied themselves together. This is something I learned. If you're going to float a river, you make sure everybody who's going can take care of themselves, and you do not tie anybody together. Period. And you make sure you got the right tools for the job.
The weak die while the strong survive. It's just
Right.
nature.
So they drift apart, and my canoe goes in between their two tubes. So between this one tied behind me and between them on either side of me, I could not control this canoe at all. Like we were just going with wherever the water was taking us. And we got tangled up in, I don't even know what they were. They're like these big pillar thingies that are sticking out of the water. And we got wedged in between them. And there's one that was down lower in the water that the rope that was attached to my parents' tubes got tangled around. So they were stuck, and I was wedged in there. Had the two kids with me. Thankfully, we were all wearing life jackets. Oh, my dad cut the rope between him and my mom went drifting off. She was gone. And then my dad was trying to help get the canoe unwedged. And all of a sudden, his tube popped out from underneath him, and he went down into the water just at the same time that the canoe broke loose and we started floating down the river again. Both of my kids just start screaming because Grandpa disappears, right? And he pops up probably 100 feet down the river. He pops up, he can hear the kids just screaming their faces off, and he waves his hands and lets us know he's okay. And the canoe, there was a great big tree that was coming off of the bank, and the canoe went underneath that tree between me and, so I was in the front of the canoe, the kids were in the back of the canoe. The tree came across the center and like kind of wedged us in there, and as the canoe was still moving forward, it was pushing it further and further down. So I just yell at the kids, I'm like, lay down, and they both lay down in the canoe. The tree comes to the end and gets hung up on this little lip that's at the back end of the canoe, and we're sitting there, and I'm like, oh my goodness, what do I do, right? Like, do I put the kids up on the tree and tell them to go up to the shore and we just hope that help will come, or what? So I just like have you ever heard like that extreme adrenaline rushes can give you like supernatural strength, basically?
Right. Like
So
lifting
I
a
just
car
like,
off a kid or something
exactly.
like that. Yeah. Yeah.
And so I got my shoulder underneath that tree, and I just yelled. I was like, moms can lift cars. And I just like, pushed on this tree, and I did. I unwedged it from where it was caught on the back of the canoe, and we were pushed so far into the water. I wish this could have been filmed. It's so friggin' crazy. But we popped out and like literally got air and came back down into the water. And a little bit further down, there's these rapids, and I am not exaggerating when I say they were at least 4 feet high. Like, these rapids were friggin' insane. And my mom was long gone. My dad, I'm seeing bob up and out of the water. He's just got his little life jacket on. He's bobbing up and out of the water, and every time there was like a rock coming, he just like got his feet in front of him and was like bracing. We're getting closer and closer to these rapids. I am not a strong canoeer, so I didn't know what the frig to do. I'm by myself with my 2 little kids who are just screaming their faces off, scared to death. I just screamed down again. I was like, what do I do? Because I was like, do I go into this kind of sideways and try and roll with the waves? Do I, like, what the heck do I do? And I heard an audible voice. And that day I was just like, holy crap, like, there is seriously something out there that helps guide us if we ask for it, because it was so clear, and it was a male voice, not any that I recognized, and it just said, get it straight and keep the nose out of the water. So I was like, okay. That's what I did. So I just straightened out the canoe, and I gave the kids a job. I was like, anytime you notice water in here, just like take one of the cups and just start like getting the water out, right? And every time we started coming down over one of the rapids, I just reefed up as hard as I could on the nose of the boat to keep it from like nosediving into the water. And we made it through that. And when we got to the other side, my dad was up, he had got to the other side and like scrambled up on the bank and just looked friggin' exhausted. And I brought the boat up as close as I could, and I grabbed onto one of the rocks that was like right near the bank. And as I was getting close, my dad like waves me on, like, just go. And I'm like, no friggin' way. And I like grabbed onto that rock. I'm like, get in the boat.
Moms can lift dads.
Yeah. And as soon as I yelled that and like grabbed this rock, the rock broke free and the boat like drifted away from the bank again. And I looked behind me and my dad's in the boat. I'm like,
wow.
I have no idea how he did it, but he did it.
So don't sit next to you in like spooky houses, but sit next to you in a canoe. Like those are what I'm picking up from this conversation.
Oh,
That's quite the experience. That's really intense.
Have you had any other experiences after that, you know, hearing that particular male voice, or having any experiences that you might consider like a spirit guide or God, or
some sort of
Yeah.
intervention? Yeah.
So I feel really strongly that, call it intuition, call it spirit guidance, call it whatever. I feel strongly that there's been a few times where I've avoided serious death or injury because of this kind of guidance. Since then, after we moved down to Selmo, I was driving up to Nelson for something. And I had like this blackout vision, like my vision just went. I was seeing a different part of the road than what I was on. And all of a sudden I saw this semi in flames jackknife coming towards me on the highway. And I just went, holy crap, how do I not only survive this, but thrive through it, right? And I just like slowed right down, and I came around the next bend of the corner, and I was the second vehicle to come up on this scene, and there was a semi on the edge of the road in flames. It's like,
Wow. So it's almost like you were outside of your physical body in a way, like your spirit or something had seen something ahead, or
yeah,
that's
and was
pretty
like,
incredible.
this is coming, slow down so that you're not messed up in it. Like, it was wild. And then when my oldest daughter was little, so my youngest daughter hadn't been born yet. We were still living in northern Alberta at that point, in the same area that Alicia is now. And I was driving home, and I was coming up to an intersection where I had the right of way to pull into the intersection and turn left. And something in my head just said, stop before the intersection. And so I did. I just stopped before the intersection. And this truck came barreling through. I'll bet you he was going 80 to 100K, and just came, like, completely blew the stop sign.
It's a very quiet dirt road intersection, so you're not anticipating there being traffic usually, and especially when you have the right of way, there was no reason that you would have had to stop had you not had that premonition or that gut feeling that something is coming.
Lynn, I guess what would you say to, or how would you address the skeptics who question the existence of all of this? What evidence or personal experiences do you find most convincing when having these conversations with people who are on the fence? What typically can you see swaying them when you start talking about it, or do you find most people just kind of shrug it off because they're totally skeptical?
In my experience, I think everybody is on their own individual journey. And what I've seen is really strong skeptics aren't really going to be swayed one way or the other, no matter what you say. I honestly think that just being honest and true about my own experiences gives people the space to explore whether they've experienced something or not. That's how I find the best way to introduce this kind of stuff to people, or, for lack of a better word, sway them in the direction of seeing that this could be real, is just being honest about my own experience and letting them have their own experiences and
Sure,
get
that's
curious.
great advice. Yeah, you're not trying to convince them. You're just saying, hey, this is what happened to me. It's very real, and leaving it with them there.
Totally.
Is there any other type of paranormal phenomena that you're interested in? For instance, I think Alicia likes to talk about UFOs here and there. Is there any type of paranormal topic you've always been drawn to, even with or without personal experiences?
I do really love learning about any creature, like Sasquatch, fairies, gnomes, like all of those mystical kind of little creatures, because my brain always goes, fairy tales had to come from somewhere. So who saw what that made this theory or this idea go out there, right?
Yeah. Yeah, like there's some creatures throughout the world where there's only the legend of them in that one particular space. But then you look at other creatures like dragons, where they're encountered by different, civilizations throughout history that weren't connected in any way or could share information in any way. And same with Sasquatch and Yeti. So yeah, I completely agree. Thanks for joining us, Lynn. We're thankful you could participate and share some of your experiences and dive into this conversation with us. Tonight we talked about, spiritual authority. We talked about some of Lynn's experiences, and we talked about what it means to kind of view things from a different perspective, especially in light of our upbringing. Did you or someone have experiences with energy movement and with haunted history in your home? We would love to connect with you. Send us a message or add your thoughts and comments below, and we'll respond right back. Thanks for joining us. Remember to stay weird, and we'll see you next time on Midnight Mysteries. Have a good night.